the name of your show is The Engine of Beasts. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, it's a play on a couple of things. Engine to me speaks to render engine, which is some of the software that I'm using in order to create the sketches that I paint from. But at large, I also think that the word engine speaks to this idea of a heartbeat, of something that comes to life, that is animated. And in this show, there are a number of animals that are not animals, you know, sculptures that are objects that in a way have this engine where you feel like they're alive, you feel like they're about to come to life.
And they are beasts.
Yeah, well, and also, yes, the beasts portion, I suppose, is, I loved the word because it seemed to have a kind of violent, unknown mystery. You know, it doesn't quite have the mythic energy of some other words, but it's also imprecise. And very much like these animals, as I'm sure we'll get to, they're not accurate depictions of things. They live in this zone of association.
So until now, you've been working mainly with landscapes that are empty, or not empty, but empty of living, of beasts and humans. Why did you decide to tackle the theme of animals this time around?
Well, again, I found that the landscapes were still alive, you know, that I could see the trees as actors and agents, but I was also aware that many people, when they're looking at them, felt like there was this empty vitrine, that it was hard to see the lifespan of trees. And when you introduce an animal, there's this immediate association with ourselves and our own lifespans. And I like this idea of using animals as fables, and then also speaking to the kind of associations in machinery between animals and humans. We're really not that far removed from animals. We are animals, but we consider ourselves to be so a part of things. And so I figured by having animals in these paintings, I could speak to different personal human narratives.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word lifespans, because it brings in the whole question of birth and death, and I mean, are these themes that you're thinking of as you're creating animals?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I was saying, this sort of ignition, this spark of life is definitely a part of it. But you also see in the types of animals that get used, they have their own symbolic meaning. I mean, we see the lamb, which again is this sort of, in Judeo-Christian, there's this sacrificial lamb element of the victim. You have the fox, which often in fables speaks to craftiness or sly people. And so, I think that the animals are all imbued with personality as well as with time.
Yeah, the looks in their eyes is, in fact, the eyes really stand out in these works, huh? They're a little alarmed, or they look sort of overwhelmed at times by their landscape.
Well, there's a sight, I feel like there's a sight line in a lot of them where we know where to look in the painting based on what's happening. You know, there are a couple of paintings that are very frontal, where the animals almost have this address or confrontation with the viewer. But for the most part, there's an action that seems to be happening that does not entirely concern us, and we can follow the animal's sight lines, which is also apparent, I think, in the room that has the fox looking at its own shadow.
So, for somebody who might not be familiar with your work, it looks very, well, there's a very classical element. There's a bronze in this one, or several bronzes, it's oil paintings, but there's a lot more layers hiding behind. Can I just ask you to take us through your process?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, because you're right. I think it speaks to sort of salon painting, heroic painting that we're maybe more familiar with, but there are a lot of new technologies in the process. So the way I start is I will come up with an idea, usually a sketch, a drawing. And once I have the drawing, I move into sculpture. And when I'm sculpting, I usually am doing it in VR, where I have my joysticks and I'm, making things bigger, smaller, whatever, at the flip of a button. And I'm also doing sculpture in real life. So then I take both of these forms of sculpture. I start a painting with sketching. I'll come up with an idea, do a quick drawing, and from there I use the drawing as an armature for sculpture. I make most of my sculptures in virtual reality, so I'll take my controllers and make things in this zero gravity space, and from there I can move them, light them, and create these digital dioramas that then I paint from. This show, though, I should say, there's a nuance because I'm beginning to do sculpture in real life with my hands and then bringing that into the computer and making a painting. So it's a kind of complicated process that involves drawing, sculpture, and I suppose a little bit of digital photography, and then finally ends in painting.
So let's look at what sculpture means in this, when you talk about it as well, because you have a bronze fox. I think, is this the first time you've worked in bronze?
Yes, I've done a couple small studies, but this is my first big sculpture project.
How did you start for the fox?
So I started with a drawing, then I went into virtual reality and sculpted it from where I perceived the weight to be. But I suppose it's important to say that I didn't actually look at any pictures of foxes. I wanted to keep it in my dream world, my associative world of what I thought a fox might look like without fact-checking it. And so once I sculpted it in VR, I 3D printed it and added clay to the 3D print, took it to a foundry and cast it in bronze. But it's a cool hybrid of having really hand-felt texture and carving met with this machine-like precision from the 3D print.
So you say that you work from within your landscapes, that you're part of the ecology. Is that as hallucinatory an experience as it sounds?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very strange thing to be in a world that you can manipulate all conditions around you. It's a kind of a new form of plein air painting where you are at the mercy of the thing you've sculpted. You have everything that you've created all around you. It's just a very different experience to be swallowed by your own creation. And as much as I enjoy that experience, I also find it very important that the paintings are these kind of remnants of those experiences, but that they're not firsthand for the viewer. I don't want to actually take people into my sculpture. I think it's much more interesting for them to have this kind of remnant, this picture of it instead.
Yeah, what effect do you think that has on the final product and on the viewer's experience then?
Well, I hope that the paintings have a sense of volume, space, and light that is really convincing, where there's something eerie about it. It doesn't feel entirely fabricated, but I think it's because I'm working with artifice so much, I do not want the viewer to be fact-checking. So I do not want the viewer to have the virtual sculpture experience, to compare the two. It's far more convincing to just be presented with a world or an image of a world than to see the sort of how. And it's fun for us to talk about, but when you force someone to just see the image and not know how it was created, I think it inspires a different type of thinking in the viewer.
And how about the possibilities it gives to you to play with, for example, light? Does this open something up that perhaps wasn't available to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different forms of lighting, different ways that you can light things, transparencies. It's theatrical lighting, even it's theater times 1,000. You know, like it really makes you question even in reality what can be manipulated and what isn't. And I've said it, but I also think it's important to remember that this is in the context of landscape painting that has also been manipulated. The entire history of the pastoral landscape has been contrived in a way that we aren't always aware of.
Yeah, what do you think it means to be a landscape painter in 2024?
Yeah, as we all go extinct. I mean, it's funny that, you know, in a lot of ways my landscapes are sort of science fiction, but it begs the question of how much of our environment is approaching a kind of science fiction or a reality that we can't foresee, didn't expect. The world is just changing so much that I'm beginning to not see the clear fault lines, the clear distinctions between the fictions in the worlds that I create versus these new conditions, catastrophes that we're faced with in general.
And you live in California.
Yeah. I mean, we just had a crazy earthquake that, you know, knocked the ventilation pipe down in my studio, and we're being forced to kind of contend with an environment that's beginning to fight back. And, you know, I was speaking earlier of sentience, of consciousness, and I don't want to get too woo or hippie, but I do think it's fascinating, this idea that maybe the earth can have its own form of consciousness, that maybe it has an intention that we are not aware of.
I want to talk about some of the works in this show. Like your landscapes, many of these animals are strange and hybrid and a little disturbing. So there's a ram with an antenna, sort of like a snail. There is a sort of the bloody, I don't know if it's a bloody face, sort of the little lamb in the kneeling, sort of looking very victimized. There's I guess it's a fawn that it looks like is behind a veil. Now, is it your intention to find this sort of, for these to be disturbing, or is this something that's bigger than you that happens in the process and they come and they're, you know, they become sort of grotesque beasts?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I see them as these hybrids, but they're not that disturbing to me, maybe just because they're my own creations. But, you know, I think that the conversation that I'm having in a lot of ways mirrors the conversations that are happening with AI. When AI generates something and it's wrong, you know, it's so offensive to us in this way of like, how did AI not know that a dog's ears look like this or something? But there's an honest mistake in it. There's an honest not knowing that creates an opportunity to know. And that is what really I've enjoyed, is I've looked at a lot of, you know, medieval paintings of various creatures, demons, and to see the similarities, see how they almost look like animals that actually exist, but then there's just a slight deviation. I think that's what you're speaking to too, is like, it's that deviation that is the offensive part. If it were too far removed, we wouldn't even be able to fathom it. So all of these, because they're from my idea of what, say, a lamb looks like or what a horse looks like, I embrace my own visual dyslexia when I get it wrong. I find that sort of more interesting when I get it wrong in these creatures.
I think coming back to the look in the eye, I think there's something there too. It's almost human. The way that there's so much happening.
Yeah.
In their eyes.
Oh, totally. I mean, again, with AI, I think that entire conversation is now begging this question of what are the differences in types of intelligence? You know, if humans are animals, then, and aren't we both machines? The animal machine, the human machine, like where are these barriers? And yeah, this look of the eye, to me, I'm really trying to get at that. Like, how are we really that different from these creatures?
And if we're machines, we're in a period where robots are beginning to take our place. I don't know if you're, you know, even you as an artist, there at some point you're working with the robot, aren't you?
Totally. No, there's this idea of that is effective technology, is when it can be this stand-in or this proxy. And I mean, in fables, we had animals to stand in for humans, to educate us, to, you know, imbue certain morals onto our children. And in the same way, you know, robots are becoming proxies for humans. We're slowly getting replaced. And I just think that this question between like an instinct and an intellect are they're a lot more porous than we assume.
So there's a series that you have where you've stripped out much of the color. They're you know, closer to black and white, much colder. The light is colder. To me, they look like wire sculptures with like sort of fabric or skin stretched over them, and in the case of the horse, almost, you know, holes ripped in it. Can you tell me about these?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm so glad that you picked up on that wire quality. To me, yeah, it really speaks to architecture, to the ligature. That horse painting in particular, one of the reasons that I find it to be a linchpin of the show, and that it's at the end of this sort of chapel, this primary heroic spot, is it is the perfect fusion of drawing, as we kind of see in the head, but then the body is so sculpture. It's not a horse's body. It's this, like you said, almost a wire, but there's an ambiguity to it. So I just enjoyed playing. I feel like it's a little tongue-in-cheek because we're all calling it a horse, but it's really living in this world of object where it's unknown. And again, to speak to like that question of an animal, an object, something that is alive versus something that is dead, you know, these are all the types of conversations that I want to have, not just conversations around the environment or landscape.
This might be a stupid question, but do you find that still today people are surprised to see a young woman from a good background creating art that is somewhat disturbing and so, you know, it can be creepy? Do you get any sort of reaction to that?
Oh, what a good question. I love that question so much because, you know, I think in a time where identity is at the forefront of a lot of painting, as it should be, there's this real question of where are you in your art? And am I present in the painting? Is my femininity present in the painting? And the answer is kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think that we have multiple selves, and so perhaps there's a kind of seriousness that we don't expect from young women that does come through in the painting. That's just such a good question. I'll have to think more on it. I don't know.
You'll call me.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that art is really about looking, and it's about care. And so this idea that you have natural talent or you don't, I was just a child that cared very much about drawing, painting. So yeah.
So any idea what's next?
Oof, I don't know. I mean, I'm really curious to see where this journey of sculpture and creature goes, and to begin to think about the sort of spirit of these creatures. Again, that animating factor. I am very puzzled in my own life about where creativity comes from, you know, this sort of larger question of spirit. And yeah, so I'm just trying to be very open. I think my next steps are to be more of a tuning fork for the world.
Creativity, but also creation. We're living at a time where we're questioning the sentience of computers and whether or not we're creating, sort of human-like. And here you are, also bringing these beasts to life. Does it feel like a spiritual act or like playing God when you're working?
Absolutely. I think that we're starved for that. Kant said something like, humans are an animal that craves a master, and I think we're all looking for that, whether that is a belonging or something else. So I don't know that when I'm creating I think that obviously about it, but I think that it's a wonderful opportunity just to be porous and be open to the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was so much fun. This was really, really great.